We are back. It is Casual Friday. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland, and it is a pleasure to welcome back to the program Heather Parton, or Digby. Heather, we just had our 20th anniversary of the Majority Report the other day, and you have been, I feel like you've been coming on the show for, well, at least 14, 15, 16 of those years. You came on with were you still anonymous back in like the Air America days? I can't remember.
Yeah, I didn't go on anything in those days. I was still a pseudonymous blogger, so I didn't do that. But I did come on, and of course I did, all those years of Ring of Fire with you.
Yep.
And I think that goes back at least 15 years. So
I mean, you've been on this show
absolutely.
for the past, we've been doing this iteration now for 14 years come this November.
Well, I think I've been coming on since the beginning then.
Without a doubt.
Since you started this, yeah.
I guess I never asked you though, Heather, how did you come up with Digby? Was that your pseudonym?
It was a mistake. It was a nickname that had been given to me by my husband many, many years ago, and I used it on forums, and I sort of became known on certain internet forums. So when I started the blog, I kind of kept it just because I was kind of known, and then it's just, it stuck. So it's just a mistake, although it's kind of memorable. I mean, people seem to sort of remember it, so I guess it's could be worse.
There was and for I don't know how many years it was that like half of Atrios's posts were like Digby said. That was basically the way that he would start that thing. So great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lot of things happening with abortion rights this week that make the news. Obviously, in Arizona, the state Supreme Court ruled that an 1864 law, back when Arizona was just a territory, not even a state.
And women, of course, couldn't vote.
Women, of course, couldn't vote. The Civil War was still going on. I mean, a lot of things were happening back then, which criminalized abortion, not just for doctors, but also for women who had abortions at that time. The law was then, when Arizona became a state, I think it was in 1916, somewhere around there, maybe it was 1912, the law was reaffirmed. And then in 2021, I believe it was, the part of the law that called for the jailing of women was repealed. But the one with the doctors were left in place, which I think is really important when we hear these stories of like somehow this was just the Republican state Supreme Court appointed by Republicans, but not like the Republican Party.
Oh, absolutely. They had a chance in 2021. They actually, they delved into this whole thing. The legislature did, and the governor ended up signing this 15-week abortion ban, but leaving this other law on the books. They could have taken it out then. Not only that, as you just said, they amended that old law to take it out and left the draconian punishment for doctors and the pretty much total prohibition against abortion on the books, knowing very well that what has happened now could happen. And in fact, they packed that Supreme Court with Republican right-wingers, one of whom is a guy named Clint Bollock, who has been in very, very far right-wing legal circles for many, many years. I mean, that name was very familiar to me. When I saw that he'd been put on the Arizona Supreme Court, I'm going, really? I mean, like, that's like putting, who can I think of? Jay Sekulow or somebody like that on a Supreme Court. It's like, he was an activist is what he was. So they packed that court, knowing full well that this is the sort of thing that would happen. And then, as we just saw this week, given the chance to, after the huge outcry about the affirmation of that law, the Democrats brought it up on the floor of the legislature, which of course is Republican majority. and they refused to vote on it. So, I mean, these Republicans in Arizona are about as far right as it's possible to get. I mean, they literally, I mean, they're the Tommy Tuberville level of Carrie Lake level. I mean, I guess that
Right.
should cleared up. So, this is this is something that they consciously did. And you have this ex-governor, Steve Ducey, you remember, who became some kind of a hero because he didn't pick up the phone when Trump called once or something. He's the guy who did that 15-week abortion ban and who, signed off on the idea that they would amend that older law. So he's now out there saying, oh, we never meant for this to happen. And, I mean, part of this, and I think it's really important that we realize exactly what they're up to here. And the anti-abortion movement in this country is very sophisticated. Don't ever assume that there's some primitive people who don't understand politics, who are just out there, flinging things at the wall and hoping they stick. They're very strategic, and they have been since the beginning. One of the strategies they're deploying right now is this idea that a 15-week abortion ban is the moderate compromise. It is not. It's a ban. It would change everything for people in the states where you live and the state where I live. Suddenly, abortion would be banned if they did a national 15-week abortion ban. That is not a moderate compromise. But by having all this extreme stuff out there, including, and I'll just, sort of digress a little bit, Donald Trump on Monday came out, and said very, flamboyantly, I am not for a federal ban. I'm going to leave it up to the states. He supposedly thought that would just take it off the table. Almost immediately, Lindsey Graham and the anti-abortion forces, led by, I think it was the Susan B. Anthony group or one of the big ones, came out screaming, how dare he? Of course we want a federal abortion ban. Lindsey Graham, we have to have the 15-week abortion ban. Donald Trump goes after both of them on Truth Social and starts screaming about Lindsey Graham as a traitor and a sellout or whatever. That's kabuki, because the point of that is to make Donald Trump look moderate. And to have this 15-week abortion ban that's the moderate compromise. And Donald Trump is so great, even he won't even sign off on that. I mean, and I don't know whether Trump is in on this kind of strategy, because he's not, I mean, come on. I think a lot of everything he does is pretty impulsive and just kind of, feral instinct. But certainly Lindsey Graham has set this up as being, a 15-week abortion ban is the moderate compromise. We've all got to get behind it. That's what they're working toward. And no one should, on a national basis, and no one should fool themselves about that. And I don't think any of the anti-abortion groups or any of the people who are involved in this are fooled by it. It's pretty clear what they're trying to do. They're working toward getting a national ban, and in the meantime, they are making the most draconian, ugly, oppressive laws around abortion that they can wherever they can. And it's extremely ugly. And, the whole Republican Party is implicated in it. None of them should ever be able to get away from this, because they've all signed off on things like, personhood bills, which are what make IVF completely, illegal if they were to pursue those things, and heartbeat bills and all this kind of thing. All that's happening all over the country and has been for a long time. I mean, these things didn't spring up out of nowhere. All of that stuff has been sitting there under the surface waiting for Roe to be overturned. And Donald Trump, at least facilitated the overturning of it. And Leonard Leo and Mitch McConnell and the entire right-wing legal establishment was prepared the moment they got the chance to do it. So, here we are. And it's pretty horrifying. I mean, I have to say, if you just look at it dispassionately, take the politics out of it and what it means for the Democrats or means for the Republicans, this is a really hideous thing they've done. I mean, to take away this right and then to go to such great lengths to actually kind of torture women in these states and, put women in this terrible position and then threaten them with even worse, which is what's happening, threatening with the abortion pill and talking about the Comstock Act and all the rest of this. I mean, this is really, I'm kind of surprised, to tell you the truth, when I look at this, just how awful it actually is.
Well, the point you made about this being, obviously just like the Republicans more broadly, people forget this, but as recently as 2019, Liz Cheney.
Nice.
Sorry,
That might have been the first time.
I don't always. That's why I was looking at him like Liz Cheney. She was up there saying that Democrats want to kill babies after they're born.
Yes, absolutely.
And I mean, people forget this. It was only 2019, right? It was just like 1 year, like before Trump's, really basically 2 years into Trump's term. And she's still saying stuff like this. She still may say it. I don't know. But it's not going to get her on television in the same way. This is the Republican position, and it is fascinating to watch them all sort of backtrack in this way because they realize like we've gone too quickly. Here is Donald Trump. 3 days after he had just come out with a video on Truth Social. It's up to whatever happens in the state. We're going to let it happen in the state. I'm not for a ban. Here it is. I have no position on it. I've never heard of abortion or anything that he does that video. And now here he is 3 days later, basically saying the opposite. Here it is.
Did Arizona go too far? Yeah, they did, and that'll be straightened out. And as you know, it's all about states' rights. That'll be straightened out. And I'm sure that the governor and everybody else are going to bring it back into reason, and that'll be taken care of, I think, very quickly. What do you think about Florida? Florida's probably maybe going to change also. See, it's all about it's the will of the people. This is what I've been saying. It's a perfect system. So for 52 years, people have wanted to end Roe v. Wade to get it back to the states. We did that. It was an incredible thing, an incredible achievement. We did that, and now the states have it, and the states are putting out what they want. It's the will of the people. So Florida's probably going to change. Arizona's going to definitely change. Everybody wants that to happen. And you're getting the will of the people. It's been pretty amazing when you think.
Okay, so just to be clear, it's up to the will of the people in the states. And I don't think that what they did is right and they should change it. And they're going to change it, except for it turns out they're not going to change it. And in fact, it turns out that the change that he's talking about that he wants is actually they changed it the other way. They had the opportunity 3 years ago to change it, and they specifically didn't change it. And so change states' rights, and I did Roe v. Wade. That's what the message is.
Well, it is. And by the way, he's also saying, and so that's the end of it. We don't have to talk about this anymore. This is over. I solved the problem. States' rights, states' rights, states' rights. And so everybody can just relax. That's what everybody wanted. And I gave them what they wanted. You know, this is delusional on his part, but what isn't? I think it's the best he could come up with. Obviously, he is, like I said, he has a sort of a feral instinct, and he understands that this is a very potent issue for the American people. And what I don't think he understands I know he doesn't understand it. You know, there's a deeper moral issue, and there's also a much deeper political issue that's running through this entire campaign, and abortion rights are at the very center of it, which is this idea of Republican authoritarianism and taking away people's freedom. And this is the singular issue that we can point to that shows exactly what that means in people's lives. And it is, these stories of women who are, this isn't just about, somebody going to get an abortion. It's about women being denied, necessary medical care to preserve their health and their lives because nobody knows what any of this stuff means. And in the end, it's that, they're basically saying, well, if women have to die, they just got to die because that's how it goes. This is what we believe, and this is what we're going to do. And I think that's becoming, or it has become instinctively very clear to, most Americans. If you look at the polling, support for abortion rights has gone up. It's not going down.
Even amongst Republicans.
Yes. Well, they're seeing the ramifications of this. It's one thing to sit around and go, I'm pro-life, I love babies, it's just great. It's another when you start seeing what this really means. Now, those of us who followed this issue, closely over the years knew this was going to happen. I mean, you could see it. There's no mystery to what happens if you take away this right. But for a lot of people, it was just something they could easily kind of, say, oh, well, I have problems with it. And I just, I'm pro-life. It was an easy thing to say. Now it's not so easy. And people are becoming, I think, educated just on the basis of what you see every day. I mean,
Right.
I think anybody instinctively knows that forcing 10-year-old, rape victims to give birth to their brother is immoral and disgusting. And the idea that anybody would say that that's okay, and not only is it okay, it's, affirmatively a good thing because, all babies are good. And you have people like, I think it was the Attorney General in Indiana who wanted to prosecute the doctor who actually gave the abortion to the 10-year-old from Ohio, referencing that case that happened a few months back. I mean, this is the kind of thing that just even, Republicans who aren't complete zealots on this issue can kind of go, and certainly an awful lot of women understand the incredible, horrible ramifications of having this whole kind of vagueness around what, abortion and miscarriage. And, they arrested a woman. I think it was also
They
in
put her
Ohio.
on trial for not disposing of her miscarriage properly.
Yes. I mean, this is the kind of thing that makes women just freak out, and it should. This isn't Margaret Atwood here. This isn't Handmaid's Tale. This isn't a dystopian novel. This is stuff that's happening to real people in America. And Donald Trump can sit around all he wants and say, "Well, it's left up to the states. It's left up to the people." Well, apparently, it's left up to the people, except for women who are pregnant. Those people don't get to make a choice on this. They don't get to decide.
It's also not up to the people. It's completely a lie, because the only way that they're able to enact these laws is without the will of the people. I mean, they have to go and resurrect these zombie statutes, as abortion advocates are referring to them, whether it be the Comstock Act when they're trying to crack down on mifepristone, or whether it be this 1860 era law in Arizona, right? Like if this was a direct democracy fight on the ballot, which it's going to be in Arizona and Florida now, right? Although in Florida you need 60%, they lose. So they have to do undemocratic things to achieve the ends that they want.
Right. And that's another good example of how this issue it symbolizes what's happening with the Republican Party and how they are approaching, democracy and our electoral system in general. I mean, that is a good example of how they now see themselves as a minoritarian party,
Right.
exerting their power in whatever way they can, by any means necessary.
Programming note: we're going to have, I think, Ari Berman, who's just written a book on that.
I can't wait to read it.
I've just started it, and it's I mean, he's written about voting rights, but putting that aside for a moment, the other thing that I think that people have become increasingly aware of too is the lie that is the exceptions to these laws. Because the Biden campaign put out an ad actually about that very topic, where a woman went in. I can't remember the specifics of her case, but they would not perform an abortion. The doctors would not perform an abortion on what they knew was ultimately going to be a miscarriage. But the longer it was allowed to exist inside this woman, the more danger to her. And she almost died twice of sepsis. She may or may not be able to have to conceive again because of the damage to her uterus. And the people see in practice that you can say exceptions, but you're not going to get a case resolved about rape within 16 weeks or very often 40 weeks for that matter. there's no, red light that pops off of the top of someone's head when they're, close to death or they're within risk. And there's no way of assessing. I mean, even if these laws said like there has to be a 30% chance of risk or a 60% chance of death, I should say, or an 80% chance of death or a 10%, which of course they don't. But there's also like, how do you, that's a vague estimate that you can't really make in that moment. And so people understand that like in practice, these exceptions are really just fig leaves. And the only, and again, that was a good ad by the Biden administration. The only problem I had is, and I understand the intensity of beating Trump, but it's a Republican problem. It's not just a Trump thing.
Right.
But one thing that strikes me is the panic that Donald Trump must have about a state like Arizona, because if the Republicans do not patch this up in some way, the level of intensity, and it's still going to be pretty intense when they put this on the ballot, and maybe even in Florida. Like, I don't know if it could work in Florida, but in Arizona, it could easily swing the election in Arizona. And that could very well be the difference in the presidential election. He's going to be freaking out about the fact that this is on the ballot and the most extreme iteration of a dispossession of people's individual rights is going to be voted on like directly. He's going to be terrified of that. But let's move to other things that he may be terrified of. And, I don't tend to pay as much attention as people might think I would want to legal cases. But Donald Trump has had a rough time in the past couple of weeks where like he found somebody who was going to pay for a bond for him to sort of like theoretically be able to not have to pay his probably $500 billion worth of fines in New York State. But it seems like that bond, issuer may not have the money either and may get rejected. But also, he has a greater than zero chance of like being convicted in a criminal court case with this hush money. Update us on this.
Well, it's going to start on Monday. So this is the beginning of the first criminal trial of Donald Trump, and everybody should understand he's got to be there every day. This isn't one that he can skip if he wants to. The defendant has to show up for a criminal trial. Now he's pretending like he thinks that's really great and that, he's going to make a lot of money and he's a martyr. He's calling himself Nelson Mandela. He says he'd be honored to be the Nelson. I know it's really
incredible,
so ridiculous. I know. I mean, it's so absurd. But if you read as I do, because it's my job, and I envy those of you who don't have to do this, read his Truth Social feed every day. He is in a complete panicked frenzy on there about this case. There is no way you can read that and not see that this is a guy who is terrified, or at the very least, panicked in some major way about, something that's going on in the legal case, because he is on there, practically every 15 minutes with these long diatribes and, just completely insane stuff. The Biden Justice Department weaponizing the DOJ, blah, 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 and the judge and going after the judge and going after, well, as we know, he's gone after the judge's family and, how dare they put a gag order on me, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll see that he goes, he'll go until like 1:30 in the morning, and then at 6 a.m. he starts up right again. So, it's just from the moment he goes to bed until the moment and the minute he wakes up, he's fretting about this, and for good reason. This case, which everybody said at the beginning.
Can I just interrupt you because you wrote in I can't remember which piece it was, but one of yours that you read that like. Don't know why he's doing this. It might be like just sort of like self-soothing, like a thing, like when a baby has a pacifier. But it's also he doesn't drink, and you don't want to be hitting the Adderall that maybe in the past has been a crutch for him. So it really is like Truth Social really could be just sort of like where you or I might have a
A
glass
diary?
of wine or a bourbon.
It's therapeutic.
He just goes on there and just.
Well, don't
does.
therapists say journal, right? Get all of your feelings out. I mean, that's essentially what Truth Social is. It's like his personal blog. I mean, who else uses that thing?
He's also watching the stock that is reliant on Truth Social just drop like a rock. All right, but so he's terrified of this. All right, so go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I just have to just say one thing. The kind of thing that he does to self-soothe, which is what I flagged in my tease with stuff like, he says, it'll just be some outburst, Biden trials, election interference, I mean, it doesn't, you're okay. He had to blurt that out and he types it in all caps, So that's why I thought, this is he's doing this is some kind of a personal sort of therapeutic exercise for him. And I guess for his readers, because, if you read Truth Social, one of the fun things to me is that the comments, they don't actually comment on Truth Social like you would see on Twitter or another social media platform. It's all memes. It's just memes, pictures, memes, just that's all they do. His people don't actually say anything. They also self-soothe with some kind of what they think is some kind of clever meme, Donald Trump is Jesus, that kind of thing. It's hilarious. It's a really weird, it's a weird community. Let's just put it that way, unsurprisingly. Anyway, yes, he's terrified. And he should be terrified because in the beginning, I think everybody thought that this case was kind of, it's Stormy Daniels, old news, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of a stretch legally that this is going to be criminal and blah, blah, blah. As it turns out, as we've seen the rulings come down from the judge and the appellate courts, which could have put, and also in the federal court, which said, no, you're not moving this over to the feds, which is what Trump wanted to do because he felt like he could manipulate that, but would get a better jury, I think is what the reasoning behind that. But the case, as it turns out, and as most of the legal analysts now looking at what we know about it and what seems to have been seen by the judges that have looked at the case, it's actually a pretty good case. And it seems to be a pretty simple case to make to a jury, at least from what I'm not a lawyer. So I'm just repeating what I hear from a variety, and it's not just one or two, MSNBC lawyers. I mean, this is something that you hear from others as well, that it's actually a pretty good case. And he's terrified because what this case is going to be discussing is one of the last things he wants to be talking about right now, which is the fact that he had this relation, had this, what do you want to call it? I guess it wasn't an affair exactly. He had this, moment in sexual, tryst.
I think it was, their relationship. I don't know if it was a sexual ongoing, but he tried to get her on he tried to get her on The Apprentice. I know this through stories that I have heard that have been, were people who had first-hand conversations with some of the principals prior to Donald Trump ever running for office. But go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. And which would suggest he wanted to have an ongoing relationship with her, right? I mean, he wanted to get her on The Apprentice.
Or it could just be we had one great night and I felt like I wanted to do her a solid afterwards.
It could be.
Call me sentimental. I'm sorry. Call me sentimental. Yeah, Trump is very sentimental. But he's also one of the witnesses in this case is Karen McDougal, with whom he did have a long-term affair, or at least it went on for many months, and it was something that she considered at the time to be a serious affair in around that same period. So, what people are going to be reminded of is that Trump, when his wife Melania within months of staying at home with his newborn son, was out having affairs with Playboy playmates and porn actresses. So, he does not want this to be what people are talking about. And yet, he'll be out there saying it's all a witch hunt and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, that this is he knows what the power of tabloid media, right? I mean, he lived it for
decades. That was his bread and butter before he got into politics. And he knows what the power of that is, and he knows how much people are going to eat this up. And they are. So on a political basis, he's obviously concerned about that. But on a legal basis, I think he knows they've got him dead to rights. The only question here will be whether the judge and the jury decide that this legal theory that they have, in which what they're saying is that Trump paid hush money to her. We know that's true. I mean, they're signed checks, and he signed them in the Oval Office. I mean, he paid the money, and we know that he paid the money to shut them up. And they're going to have David Pecker, who was the head of, who was the chairman
National
of the
Enquirer, right?
National Enquirer, and his top executive as well will be testifying to this deal that they had made with Donald Trump, called Catch and Kill, where any of these stories that came up, the National Enquirer was going to buy them up, get the people to sign NDAs, and then not actually print the story, and keep it off at least until after the campaign. And that's key, because by having that deal about the campaign, and about, Trump's going to try and say, well, of course I didn't want Melania to find out.
Right.
I mean, we have a lovely marriage. I didn't want to hurt her. He'll say that. But the reality is that the real reason behind this was to keep it out of the campaign. And the timing of the Stormy Daniels stuff happening around the Access Hollywood tape coming out is also key, because at the end of the day, what Alvin Bragg is saying is that he violated campaign finance laws. By doing this, he's being charged with state crimes that have to do with phoning up financial records, which he did. And golly, there's a $450 million fraud case out there right now that he's been found guilty of phoning up financial records. So it's not like this is a one-off. I mean, obviously the guy was doing this in many other ways as well. So he doesn't have any credibility on that. So at the end of the day, what they're going to prove is that he did this. He violated campaign finance laws in the middle of this very fraught presidential campaigin by doing this hush money, and that's what the felony is that he's being charged with.
All right, so we have the political sort of silo and the legal silo in terms of the jeopardy that's facing him. I want to come back to the legal one in just a moment, and talk about the fact that somebody's already gone to jail for this.
Yes.
For this, within this case, which
exactly
I think is really
which
is why he's probably freaking out on some level. In terms of legal jeopardy, in terms of the political jeopardy, I wonder, he's been doing a lot more God squad-y stuff as of late. Like this early in the campaign, it's been like he always did some of it. There's no doubt about it. But it seems like he's dedicated a lot of time in the past month or so to the God Squad stuff. And I wonder if that is...
He's calling Election Day Christian Visibility Day.
I mean, I wonder if it is a function of like he's worried that all this stuff that might come out, and again, it's going to be in the sort of like primary source of news that people get, like these sheets in the supermarket. If he's worried that that's the constituency he's got to worry about, that maybe he's already sort of like, but I wonder if that's actually like, that's more. I don't think those people are shakeable. I don't think like the more that he's, the more that they've found to be like, having done slimy things, that was then. He's redeemed himself, and he sort of did for these Christians. I mean, he gave them everything they wanted.
He's being prosecuted for his or our sins. I mean, you can interchange it.
But let's talk about the fact that somebody already went to jail for this. His former lawyer, I can't even remember the guy's first name.
Michael Cohen.
Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen also, we should be clear, he's a liar.
Yeah.
He's a liar. he lied on service of Donald Trump. I mean, I
Well, that's what he's going to say. He's going to say, yeah, I lied. I was working for Donald Trump. He told me to lie, and I lied.
Which is amazing, too, because Weisselberg just went to jail for 5 months. He's going to Rikers for the fraud case, for not being honest with the jury. A separate case, but still, just like how many of these people are going to jail surrounding Trump?
Why is it taking Trump? Why is it taking so long? We're 3 years out from him being the sitting president, but Cohen went to jail 5 years ago. Why is it taking so long to get to Trump in this case?
There's a reason for it, and that is that it was originally a federal case, and Cohen was convicted on federal charges.
Okay.
And so the feds sat on it. Gee, I wonder how that happened. They sat on the case. In fact, Cohen says that, they went after him, because Trump was president. I mean, he was targeted by the Sessions and then Barr Justice Department because he had, confessed to lying on behalf of Trump. So they went hard after him. And then they sat on the case and decided not to charge it. Nobody really understands exactly what happened there, why they didn't, because the federal charge is good. It's the basis of Alvin Bragg's case, except that he's bringing it under state laws about financial crimes. But it's the same case and the same facts in the case, and many of the facts were developed in that federal case. There's a whole story about this guy named Mark Pomerantz who worked for the federal case and then went and I guess consulted with Alvin Bragg and whatever. Trump talks about him all the time. They brought him in. Biden brought him in. He brought him in. Pomerantz. They brought him in. He does this big thing. It's meaningless, but nonetheless, he's the one who thought that he has revealed a number of these sort of issues within the case that somehow in the federal case never really made it. So that's why that happened. And Bragg, I think, he was reluctant to take on the case when he became Manhattan District Attorney. And you recall he said, we don't really see it. I'm not sure what happened there, but somehow or another, something convinced him that this was worth doing. And I cannot imagine that he thinks he's going to lose this case. Why would you take a case against Donald Trump that you didn't feel was really strong?
Right.
Because if it goes bad, I mean, he's ruined.
Yes, you're done.
You're totally cooked. And he didn't have to, right? I mean, this was a case that has sort of been sitting there, been on a simmer. He didn't have to take it. So, maybe I'm being too optimistic about, by all accounts, Alvin Bragg's a very smart guy. And is not somebody who was sort of ever a big, kind of partisan flag waver. So I suspect that this case, they figure when they finally got, pulled all the evidence together. And by the way, there's a ton of documented evidence on this. They've got emails from everybody.
What is the potential penalty? Like, I mean, on a federal, the federal crime that Cohen's went to jail for is one thing, but can Trump theoretically go to prison in this case, or would it be fines?
So. I think he can go to prison for it, but I don't think he will. Well, first of all, what will happen is that they will immediately appeal it, and he will be released if he's found guilty. They'll immediately appeal it, and
history will absolve me, though.
Yes, and that'll take well beyond the election. I mean, there's no way they're going to haul Trump off to jail before the election. That's not going to happen. But I think that there are, to be honest with you, I'm not totally sure what the penalties are. But the fact that if he's found guilty, if in a criminal case. I think it should have some salience to voters, but like you, I don't think the Christians are shouldn't say the Christians. That's a pretty broad brush. The conservative evangelical Christians who the MAGA cult, which consists of something like 80% of white evangelicals are in the MAGA cult. Those people, I don't think they're movable either. They're not going to do it. And what you're looking at are there any sort of what you might think of as being sort of normie Republicans who still have some sense that maybe it's not a great idea to have a criminal in the White House. I don't know. I mean, I don't know I don't understand those people either. So, I'm kind of stumped on that. But, it'll be very, very interesting to see. And this thing's going to go on for a while. We were talking earlier before we came on air about the OJ trial. And, that thing was just, that was a case. Of course, it was televised, and this one won't be. But nonetheless, you'll have reporters rushing out every 5 minutes to, report on what's going on in the case. And Trump will be making statements, I'm sure, every day on the courthouse steps and in the hallways and whatever, because he'll be present there. And you'll get a full narration from him as he flies off to rallies after his day in court, which is going to be kind of interesting because he'll be all worked up, I'm sure.
It's going to be like late era Lenny Bruce shows. His where Lenny Bruce was on trial for the words he was saying in I think it was in Chicago, and he would just go up on stage and start reading the transcripts from the trials.
Exactly.
And that wasn't particularly funny at that stage. But Heather, thank you so much for catching us up with this stuff. And folks,
so much.
We will link to Heather's pieces in salon.com about these and more. And also you can check out Hullabaloo. Digby, as always, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me. You guys have a great weekend.
Thanks,
You
too, Heather.